All right. Welcome to our monthly Q&A session. Super excited that you guys are here. We are going to go through a few of your questions today. We had some really good questions come in, not only through the group chat, but also through our Instagram post, where we ask people, hey, what do you want to talk about? And then we invite them into the group. So hopefully you guys, like always, will get a lot out of this session today. We're doing things a little bit differently. We're streaming it on a slightly different platform today, but hopefully you guys can hear and see me well so that we can kind of get into the topics that we need to get into today. If you have questions at all during this session, be sure to drop them in the live chat and I will answer them as they come up or at the end of today's session. So let's just get right into it. Let's talk about your questions that you sent me. So the first question that I got this week was about LDL cholesterol. So LDL cholesterol, we talk a lot about this in relation to longevity, health, cardiovascular disease being one of those major contributors to early death and mortality, and LDL cholesterol is always kind of a controversial topic because there are people who say, you know, LDL cholesterol is not something that you need to be worried about, while other parties will say LDL cholesterol is something that, you need to keep low at all times. You need to avoid red meat, eggs, that kind of thing, which we've talked about that and how sometimes unhelpful that information can be. So the question that I got was LDL cholesterol. When should I be concerned? So essentially, when is LDL cholesterol too high? When do I need to be concerned about whether or not I need to go on medication? So just to kind of give you some context into where this question came from, is just an individual who's been operating in the tactical space for probably a decade and a half, and historically has not really had any issues with their cholesterol, but this is another case where it has trended up for the last 3 measurements or so that this person has undergone. And so just getting some concern there about whether or not we need to look into more of like a pharmaceutical route, because that was something that they definitely did not want to do. So when we look at LDL cholesterol, what you will often hear is that under 100 is considered optimal. In the tactical space, I often see people who fall somewhere between about 100 and 130. And it's not unusual to see elevated cholesterol levels in someone who experiences higher levels of stress, potentially higher levels of alcohol intake. If there are more environmental stressors that are present around that person, if there's someone who doesn't get really good quality sleep or regular sleep, and that kind of drives up those stress hormone levels a little bit, that can have an impact on your LDL cholesterol. And of course, there are genetic factors as well that might predispose you to be a little bit more sensitive to those things that can affect your LDL cholesterol. 100 to 130 is considered borderline high. Once we start getting past that 130 mark is when we start to get a little bit concerned. Ideally, of course, even if we're approaching that mark, we want to do interventions already to make sure that we're moving back down in the right direction. Most of the doctors that I send my athletes to, especially if they come back with their labs altered as far as their lipid panels go, are not typically going to start them on medications at that time. Typically, they will allow them to do some type of lifestyle intervention first before going that route, unless that LDL cholesterol is very high, right? So past that 130 mark. I've even had people in my office before who are approaching 200. So those are instances where it may be appropriate to do medication while we're making lifestyle changes in order to decrease that number. While, again, there are some people who say that LDL cholesterol, you don't really necessarily need to be concerned about it. I would disagree. I would say that it is still something that you need to watch. It is still a risk factor. Ideally, we would want to be taking measurements of our particle size, so like that small dense LDL compared to the larger LDL, the larger HDL. We would want to be looking at those things to really determine like what our risk is, and to also get an idea of how we're improving that LDL cholesterol. You know, if we're moving that LDL cholesterol number down, but we're still seeing a high number of small dense LDL particles, then that is still problematic. So really, if we're getting over 100, or if our trend, right, is trending up over a couple of measurements, that is where we want to start doing those hard interventions. Once we get past 130, 150, and even higher, that's when we need to consider the conversation with our doctor to potentially start medication, with the intent that hopefully we can get off of it at some point. But we always want to make sure that we're incorporating that physician-related care also while we're doing lifestyle intervention. So if you're hovering around 130, you know, we can definitely work on some things, and we can look at other risk factors. And so at that point, that is when we want to, you know, kind of make those dedicated lifestyle interventions, but your trend is most important. So that was kind of a long rant, so I'm just going to like summarize it for you guys. So initially, like I said, what we want to do is we want to check that blood work. We want to check the trend of what that blood work has been. Are we trending up slowly over time, even if it's still in normal limits? And we want to make sure that if it is, we're doing something about it early. And if you're past that 130 mark, then, you know, at that point it might be worth it to have a conversation about medicinal support with the physician while we're making lifestyle changes. Okay, switching gears here. So what would be a good snack for energy during the day? So a good snack for energy during the day. I would say the question, or the answer rather, or the question, however you want to look at it, what we want to know is, why are our energy levels potentially low during the day, if they are? And how can we address that? When we look at energy production, remember that energy only comes from the food that you eat, and the types of food that you eat at specific times will matter when it comes to energy production. Low energy levels midday or in the afternoon could also be a symptom of poor sleep, of course. So if you are waking up a lot in the middle of the night, or if you're having trouble getting quality sleep, adequate sleep throughout the night, then that can of course manifest as fatigue or sleepiness the next day, especially as you get past lunchtime, or what would be your lunchtime is what I typically find people are experiencing. What also happens, especially with high performers, is that we often see where their energy intake is not matching their energy output. And what I mean by that is that they are sometimes under eating in a 24-hour period when laid against what they are doing as far as physical activity and physical demand. Some of you guys have really physically demanding jobs, even outside of your training sessions. Or what will happen is there's a misalignment between when you are taking energy in and when you are expending the most energy. A common example of this is if you're someone who tends to work out early in the morning and you're going into a workout fasted, and then you may or may not eat breakfast afterwards. Lunch is sometimes kind of a crapshoot. And then we're going into the evening time, potentially into another training session or not. And what's happening is we're seeing no calories or energy. Remember, calories are energy, heat energy. No calories coming into the body during the time when we're most physically active. And then we're potentially binge eating or overeating calories in the evening once we've become more sedentary. And so this is a misalignment of that energy compared to where we actually need it. So I would say to start off with, let's not over caffeinate for sure. A good snack for energy during the day would be something that's probably carbohydrate based. What I find a lot of times is that when somebody is feeling fatigue, one of the ways that we can assess where that fatigue is coming from is by incorporating some calories from carbohydrates. If you have a carbohydrate based snack, whether that be, it could be an apple, it could be a granola bar, it could be, another meal, right? Just something that contains carbohydrates. If we are taking in a snack or a small meal and 20 or 30 minutes later we're feeling relatively more energized, then that's probably a good indication that you are low on calories or that you are low on calories that day. Another option, if you're feeling low energy, is just to make sure you're getting movement. So depending on what your job is, some of you guys do end up getting stuck in a seated position, either behind a desk or in a car, or whatever the case might be. You end up getting stuck in a seated position for an extended period of time. That is also going to make your energy levels lower, simply just because you're not moving around, right? So we want to get up, we want to get that blood flowing. If you have the ability to take some laps around wherever you're at, great, do that. One of the things that has come out is there have been some studies done that show that body weight squats, 10 body weight squats, I believe, every 45 minutes has the same effect as taking walking breaks. So if you can't move around, just getting up and doing some body weight squats can be helpful, especially if you're wearing a weighted belt or a vest or something. There's kind of like that added effort there that could be beneficial. But I would say just figure out, okay, why am I low on energy? But a carbohydrate based snack is probably likely to bring you back up. Ideally, we wouldn't want to do candy bars and sodas and like very high sugar sweetened snacks. If you can get something with a little bit of fiber, a little bit of protein in it, particularly if you're not going to be training right after you eat it, then that's what we want to shoot for in order to get some of those extra calories in. If that fixes your problem, then that tells you that that was probably the issue if you're feeling fatigue. Hydration also, before we move on to the next one. So your hydration status is also going to have a big impact on your energy levels. If you are dehydrated, you are going to feel more fatigued. If you're sitting there and you notice that you're thirsty, that is going to indicate that you are experiencing dehydration, that you are already dehydrated already. And so that's going to contribute to your energy levels. The second thing, or rather the third thing that I would say, is also consider your sodium intake. So if you're dehydrated, could you potentially use a little bit more sodium to kind of bring you up, especially if you've sweated a lot earlier in that day? You potentially might need a little bit of electrolyte replenishment. If you're salting your food regularly through the day and you're getting some electrolytes around the time that you're training, that may not be the case. But it is something to consider. So carbohydrate based, make sure you're hydrated, and potentially get a little bit of sodium if you need it and you can tolerate it. Okay, third question I got today was reverse diet strategies for a prolonged deficit. So for those of you who aren't familiar with a reverse diet is typically something that we would incorporate into somebody's plan if they're experiencing issues with chronic under eating. Chronic under eating or low energy availability, not having enough calories coming in for a prolonged period of time can potentially cause an issue with something called relative energy deficit, REDS. So if it's got an S on the end of it, it's sport. If it's got the M on the end of it, it's military. And this is a situation where somebody has been so chronically overfed, so chronically underfed for an extended period of time that is having detrimental effects on their hormone levels, so their endocrine system. It's having a detrimental effect on their musculoskeletal health. So somebody might be experiencing more pain or more injuries than normal. It's potentially having a detrimental effect on their cognition, their thyroid levels. There can be a lot of things that happen with REDS that we don't necessarily always attribute to under fueling. And so in somebody who does have REDS, they also sometimes, it becomes difficult for them to lose body fat, especially visceral fat. What can be difficult about reverse dieting is we are working on actually getting more calories into the body, trying to get somebody out of that low energy availability state, trying to get their body to start producing and utilizing that energy that they're taking in again, getting their digestion moving, getting them more stable energy levels throughout the day, helping them to feel like they're recovering, maybe actually put some lean muscle on if that's been an issue in the past. Typically in a reverse diet, a true reverse diet, you're not typically going to lose weight. And in some cases, individuals will actually gain a little bit of weight. I think best case scenario would be if the weight that they're gaining is primarily skeletal muscle mass. However, reverse dieting is not something that we can utilize to improve our body composition necessarily. The goal there is to improve the inner metabolism and the workings of the metabolism and provide energy to the metabolic system, which is sometimes not always going to be reflected positively on the outside. Now, when we come out of just a standard calorie deficit, so maybe we've had you in a 12 to 16 week deficit and you've just been dieting as normal, lost a normal bit of weight, typically we wouldn't reverse diet, but we would want to bring those calories back up slowly to your proposed new maintenance if you have lost weight. That is a strategy that sometimes people miss. Is, they'll diet kind of haphazardly and they don't really plan a transition out of that diet back into maintenance. And so sometimes all the weight that they feel like they've lost comes back really quickly or within a short period of time. So they don't feel like they're able to keep it off for an extended period of time. So what we want to do is we want to find that new maintenance. So coming out of your calorie deficit, we're potentially only going to add in 100 extra calories the week that you end your deficit. And we're going to allow the body to kind of adapt to that. And then after that, we're going to add another 100 calories. And we're going to move you back up in calories, 100 to 150 calories each week until we get into that maintenance phase. That's going to be dictated by a combination of calculations, how your body's feeling, how you're training, how you're recovering, and then potentially also your body composition. We want to make sure that we're getting to that point where you can eat a large amount of calories or go back to a larger amount of maintenance calories without gaining any of the weight back that you've lost. So reverse dieting for REDS is going to be a little bit more clinically focused on the metabolism. When we'll call it reverse dieting, we'll do quotation marks. When we're reverse dieting out of a prolonged deficit, then we're just going to gradually increase those calories. Likely in that situation, there's not going to be some of those negative side effects that we experience with relative energy deficit. Okay. Macros aren't, so this is less of a question and more of a topic or a conversation that I got into a couple of times this week. And essentially what the conversation was is that you need to be really careful with the coaches, the nutrition coaches specifically, that you're working with. There's a lot of coaches out there, not even nutrition coaches, but also strength and conditioning coaches, who like to program macros for their clients and write meal plans for them and whatnot. And I'm not going to get into like the argument of, oh, they're not dietitians, they shouldn't be doing whatever. People are going to do whatever they want to do. But we need to be careful about who we're choosing to coach our nutrition, because I see a lot of mistakes being made, and I see where a lot of coaches aren't able to go beyond just straight macro coaching. And I would argue maybe in some instances they don't need to go beyond macro coaching, especially if you're potentially a strength coach or in some other field that is not dietetics or nutrition. Macro coaching might be the limit to what you feel like your skill set is, and that's perfectly fine. However, if you are working with a nutrition coach or a dietitian coach, then you need to make sure that the coach that you're working with can program beyond just straight macros. So what I see a lot of times is where an individual will hire a coach and there's not even a conversation or an in-depth conversation that takes place about what's happening with their nutrition, why they need the meal plan, what their goals are, what they've tried in the past, etc. Challenges, barriers, anything along those lines. There are definitely those individuals who are like, just write out my plan for me and I'll follow it to the T. And I would argue that those aren't necessarily the individuals who are going to be successful on a nutrition plan. If your nutrition coach can't help you understand why they're writing your nutrition program the way that they are and helping educate you to eventually be able to work on your own nutrition programming to some extent, then that is a red flag for me. They're essentially just going to pop out cookie cutter meal plans and macros because they don't really understand the nuances in nutrition programming. And so I just want you guys to be careful with that, because I have seen some crazy things even just this week being programmed into people's nutrition. Just egregious amounts of calories being added, improper structuring of macros, just some cookie cutter BS plans like chicken, rice, and broccoli like 3 times a day, which, even if you're on a cut, guys, like, you don't have to be eating chicken, rice, and broccoli just like every single day. It's just ridiculous, right? A lot of my guys are eating like burgers and tacos, and there's not a ton of meal planning that actually happens when we're working together, because the real gold mine of information is helping you to understand how to program nutrition beyond calories and macros, how to get you to understand nutrition periodization, nutrition timing, nutrient timing, supplementation, whether it be a basic on a high level. Also just understanding the cravings, the driving force, the need behind some of the foods that we choose to eat. There is a big psychological component there. And so if nutrition is something that's important to you, it's important to make sure that you're working with the right coach. Macro coaching is not performance nutrition coaching, just so you're aware. But that did come up this week. All right. So I am going to open the floor now for questions, so that you guys can pop them in the chat if you have them. And if not, we will end the call this week here. All right, as always, good to see you guys this week. I love our little conversations. If you are watching a replay of this video, make sure you jump into the weekly Saturday chat and ask your follow-up questions. And we will have our October education session in a couple of weeks. All right, so we'll see you guys then.